So sex
For
workers
sure.
are helping people all over the world here.
Listen, it's a therapeutic. It constantly is. It's a real thing. But like it's a little bit of practice.
Yeah.
It's practice and trial and error with intimate scenarios of all different kinds.
Welcome back to Muse on the Mic. I'm Riley.
And I'm Emily. Thanks again for joining us on another great episode of Muse on the Mic. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, join us on YouTube on Mondays, Wednesdays on Patreon, and Sunday nights on Patreon for Just the Tip with free for all the hottest sex tips. And follow us on social media. You'll find all that in the caption. Riley, what we're talking about today, we're getting into.
It's such a big topic. Emily and I were chatting about it before we even started recording. My mind is blown because we're talking about our brains, and it is our largest sex organ. It heavily impacts our decision making, our sexual relationships, our ego. Everything is between here, guys, and it's a big topic to discuss. So we're really just going to chat with you today about the brain and how it affects us sexually.
I mean, it's everything if it comes down to it, right? There are people paraplegics, quadriplegics, a spinal injury, all kinds of different reasons why you may not even have sexual parts, but you still have a sexual mind, right? So it really is the root of everything, kind of the controller of all things, like
Yeah.
the main system. And so us not just learning how to control that, but being aware of what it is. Awareness allows us to make better decisions. And so whether it's with a sex worker, with your partner, dating, and kind of wandering in the world these days,
Mhm.
there's a lot of elements to it that the more you understand it, the better you can navigate it. And
Yeah.
I think that's the awesome part, to be honest, at least with
And
what we're delivering today.
yeah, I'm going to get a little bit technical with you guys, at least for a moment, because there is some like science to this. So when we're talking about love relationships, lust relationships, there's categories. There's the lust phase, there's the attraction and the attachment, and they all come with different neurotransmitters or chemical reactions. So let me just read for you. With lust, it's men and women releasing testosterone and estrogen. With attraction, it's dopamine and serotonin. And for attachment, it's oxytocin and vasopressin. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that right. So there's real chemical reactions to all of these things. So, and I want that to give you guys some peace, because I think sometimes, especially I even feel this way, like I fall so easily or I get attached so easily. And there's actually things going on up here that relate to that. So take that kind of pressure off yourself and just understand it so that you can go through the journey a little bit easier and less hard on yourself, really.
Such a good point. Less hard on yourself because there's elements to all three of those phases that can make you feel a little crazy, right? It can make you feel disconnected from yourself, kind of like the wheels are spinning without any control. It can feel fast and furious often. And sometimes, or a lot of times, leave you kind of hanging sometimes. Like someone ghosts you, or a sex worker retires, or,
Mhm.
a relationship ends suddenly. You're in the midst of this, like, of like feelings, and then all of a sudden that's just like taken from you, and it can leave you very confused. It can leave you kind of mentally just not in a good place. And I think as much as dating these days is a little dicey out there, and marriages are also a little dicey these days
Yeah.
too, I think it relates to sex work a lot
Mhm.
because we see often how guys like, emotionally respond to the first time they see a sex worker, the first time they meet a different sex worker, the first
Mhm.
time they find their favorite sex worker, and the first time favorite sex worker either cuts them off, retires, change places, moves, vanishes in thin air because she was an illusion to begin with, or even just digesting the transactional nature of sex work, it can be a bit of a healthy reality check, I think. And sometimes clients get lost in the sauce, and understandably so, when your brain is filled with all these chemicals. Like
Yeah.
you're literally going home thinking about it non fucking stop, planning your day, planning your finances. When can I see her again? And all those feelings will naturally happen because, paid for or not, it's two humans exchanging intimacy, and that
Mhm.
has effect. It's just science.
Yeah. And I saw a video, I think it was, that talked about like the parts of the brain and doing an MRI, things that will like light up or
Mm.
trigger. based on thinking about, whether it's a sexual relationship or more of a maternal love, that, it is different
Right.
parts of the brain. But when we're falling or we are in lust, whether that's in your personal civilian life or with a sex worker, there's parts of your brain, and I think it's the frontal lobe that actually stops working to a certain degree, where it is like kind of your rational, your decision maker, all of those things kind of turn off, and you're left
Yeah.
with this kind of old part of your brain that's somewhere in the back that has like commitment and loyalty, and you just feel this. Even if it's a difficult situation, like you've fallen in love with a sex worker, how will I ever be with her? It doesn't matter. Your brain's telling me you can find a way. We'll do this because
Right.
love will prevail. And so you almost can't trust your own body and mind, which is really
Yeah.
tricky. So I think it's having the information of these are normal reactions and to not make decisions based on them, or maybe even knowing when to kind of tap out of a relationship. Even with it, if it is with a sex worker that you're like, I'm getting too consumed. I'm obsessing too much. It's not at a
Yeah.
healthy level anymore.
When we were just quickly chatting before we started recording this episode, that was one of the things we were just talking about. And it was like, and I feel like often a more experienced customer that's seen sex workers and providers over the years has more experience with those fleeting like phases, right?
Yeah.
And there are, I think, two different kinds of people like questing through that. There's the guy who's seeing new girls all the time, who's just craving that bigger and better rush, right? And it's got to be like the first time, like the first time, like the first time. And then there's the dudes that use it as a signal and when to pace themselves. And it's like, I'm in too deep. I got to take a break. I'm going to go see somebody different and like mix it up so that you're not getting too attached, because it's difficult. I'm not saying that never in a million years did a sex worker ever fall in love with a client.
Mhm.
It very rarely happens. I'm using
Yeah.
rarely in big capital letters, bolded, italicized, and underlined, but mostly it doesn't, right? And so I would hate for clients to feel like it's exclusively a one-sided situation. Listen, I
Mhm.
had love feelings for a lot of my clients. I adored them. They were wonderful people. And you do grow a sort of attachment. But at the same
Yeah.
time, I wasn't going home going, I wonder, I wish I was dating Bob and Bob would be my husband. Like
Mhm.
there's a difference. And I think because it's a job, it helps us navigate our brains and our physical reactions because we're human too, right?
Yeah.
So if someone's really good at this stuff when you're doing the things and it's really intimate and really intense, it can be confusing. Even if you're like consciously not being like, oh, I'm in love with Frank now. Your
Mhm.
body's chemicals might be like, hey, you're in love with Frank now because
Right.
look what just happened at 3 o'clock. Like it can
Yeah.
be confusing, but it can be so either confusing for a customer that's not familiar with it or used to it or aware of like kind of what's happening. Hopefully this episode helps. But for a more experienced connoisseur, he can then use that to help him navigate healthy and safety and mental health positive to kind of figure out when and how much, or who to
Mhm.
see how often, or how deep can I get before I lose myself a little bit in this moment. Because we often talk about the clients that are unhappily married or in sexless marriages. There's definitely clients come in that are happily in relationships. I use quotes because a grain of salt with everything there. But it can be equally confusing. What if you think you're madly in love with your wife and then you go meet this incredible broad and she does all these incredible things and now you're like, I'm
Right.
in love with two people? Like it can be
Yeah.
very confusing, right? And so just the awareness of, wait a minute, this is a chemical reaction. This isn't actually what my heart feels. It's what it
Right.
feels like when all of that dopamine is rushing or when my testosterone and estrogen are on full blast, which is quality time. Let's be real. I love those moments. And
Yeah.
that's what we do. That's what we quest for in terms of our work, right? But you don't want that to cause a spiral in your great marriage or for you to then not date because you're not used to civilians or. And I think it can give a man the tools necessary to better navigate seeing sex workers without getting into some sort of emotional spiral or an obsessive kind of situation. I think it's the same thing when you have like a stalker type client.
Mhm.
We definitely have a few of those these days, which could be a whole nother fucking episode. But I think there's reasons why that happens. Doesn't excuse the behavior, but there's reasons why that happens and
Mhm.
why that person is confused by it, because it is very confusing if you don't know any better about the fact that, wait a minute, this is just serotonin. This isn't actually love on my end, or I will be fine without them, when you feel like you can live without them. Like, it should help them navigate both civilian and sex work life, because sex work is intense. It really
Yeah.
is intense. You're balls deep in something at some point, right? So that's a lot to just go, well, that was a nice transaction. Like, you
Mhm.
have to practice that and learn that, because it's not a natural reaction to just be like, see you again at 4 o'clock Thursday. Like,
Right.
there is that human element. Sex work is the most human of services, in my opinion. And so
Sure.
to navigate that, to know the science, should help you make better decisions when you go home
Mhm.
after a fantastic time at Muse. It
Yeah.
should.
And I think for the girls, I think there's a lot of different things. First of all, just categorizing it as it's their work day is the start. I think disassociation, or like disassociating with by using a separate name, is helpful. It doesn't. It's not always the cure for everything, but they're taught, and I don't want to like say too much about the ins of our industry, but I mean, the girls want to create, lasting customer relationships, and they want to have connection, and that is good for their business at the end of the day. But there is a fine line of building a connection and becoming in lust with someone to an unhealthy degree when they're a sex worker. And I mean, it can be just as hard in personal relationships. I know Emily and I
Mhm.
have talked about this. I struggle with it a lot. I love the lust phase. I could live happily there forever. And when I'm in it, I'm in. I'm ride or die. I'll probably tattoo your name on my body. Like, I go all in, really, really hard. And part of me, there's a common sense element that I'm like, okay, Riley, these things, you've done the research, but there's also an element of like, you know what, this is life, and I want to experience the journey, and whichever way you take it, just as long as there's no awareness of what you're doing and that your body might be tricking you a bit, because at the end of the day, you could be in a relationship with someone, and once that all fades, you think, you know what, our values aren't in line, our religious
Right.
standpoints or morals aren't in line once all of those other things fade away. And that's usually that kind of aha moment of like, ooh, this wasn't love, that was lust. How didn't I see
Right.
that sooner?
And why did she tattoo his name on her? Right. So I love when you share personal stuff, because Riley and I have an agreement. There's no more tattoos, no more fucking tattoos of names, because I don't care if he ends up the depth of love of all love. No, just no. I've put my foot down and I'm like, no more, lady.
It's so weird that
But
like
it's just,
between us, I'm usually like the more serious or um more like stern one, I guess. But yet when it comes to like lust, I'm like, oh, I'm in it. Just no
yeah.
control.
And I'm the one that takes my friends and goes like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah, you're right. I'm definitely the fluffy one. I mean, I'm the one to first cry in an episode. Like, I'm
Yeah.
definitely the heartstrings girl. But there's something to it. And it's not that I'm consciously being like, that's just your serotonin. Like, I don't come at it from a science angle. But like, there's just an awareness. Once you know, and you can't unlearn something. And I've said to you, I hope with this episode that you learn from it too, so that you can remind yourself of what we're talking about now. You can go, wait, I did an episode about this. I know what this is. But that familiarity, I mean, and maybe you decide I'm still going to ride the ride, right? But, or
Mhm.
maybe you're like, wait a minute, maybe I just slow this down a little bit to give myself some grace so that you can pace yourself. And instead of a 4-month whirlwind, maybe it's just a 6-month ride. Like, it can still
Right.
be what it is,
Yeah.
but at least with your awareness, I think what you said earlier about it being negatively impactful is the
Right.
difference. Because if it
Yeah.
can be managed in a way that's positive, girl, take all the rides, do all
Right.
the things. Don't tattoo them, but do all the fun shit. Ride the lust until the sunset and his dick unto the moon. Like, go for
Right.
it, but know that about yourself, and then therefore make those decisions. And I think the older we get, the more responsibilities we have, children in the mix, like, it can get really complicated It's already complicated as just a one to figure that out in your own head. But to have those little tidbits of scientific information can make those decisions so much easier. And so put yourself in the shoes of a client as someone like yourself who already gets lost in the sauce. Imagine you're 56, you've been with the same woman for 40 years, or well, maybe not if you're 56, but 20 years, and
Right.
it's, faded out. There's no more spark. We live as roommates, yada, yada, yada. You go to a place like Muse, you meet this incredible bombshell 24-year-old who looked in your eyes and did all the things and expressed all the feels and said the right words and tickled your balls in the way that you like, and you didn't even have to tell her. Like, you're going to be lost in some sauce yourself. And so allow yourself to make smart decisions. Don't overspend as much as we want you to come in all the time. Don't bankrupt yourself. Don't run up your credit cards. Don't, put your family's finances in trouble. We've seen men make that decision a lot. Always happens around tax season. Suddenly Frank's in here like every day. Refund runs out. They're like, see you in 6 months. And you're like, okay. But like, have that common sense so that you're able to navigate those things. Don't risk certain things in your life. Don't fall for the working girl who could retire in an instant and just vanish into thin air. And maybe sometimes for guys, use a fake name yourself. Be Mark for a change. And Mark can love Susie, but in real life, you're Bob. So let's put that. I mean, at the same time I'm saying this, I'm like, Hollywood could take a lesson from this, because how many co-stars end up in lust, break up their marriages, and fall apart 6 months after the release of the movie? So, a note to everybody, and take this advice and know that circumstances can be set up in a way to promote those lusty feelings. It doesn't mean that that's your forever person. It means they're really good at their job and you're a really great client and you found your perfect person for this service.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they're the one. It doesn't mean one day she's going to leave her boyfriend and you guys are going to run into the sunset and she's never going to work again. We don't need rescue.
Yeah.
But common sense can keep everybody safer. And the safety plays in when it gets to the obsessive point too, right? Because sometimes people take it so literally that they think it's God honest truth. No, she told me this, this, and this in a session. And it's like, well, she also told you her name was Susie and she's not. So
yeah. I mean, it's all
we
a fantasy experience. And to keep that in mind, I know it's hard at times, but it's important.
Oh, hey, welcome back to Just the Tip with Riley. So today we're doing an introduction to temperature play. So let's do some experimenting with temperatures and sensations to heat up your next sexual experience. So although some would define temperature play as a kink, it's very mild or mainstream. Think about it, most lube companies have heating and cooling lubes. Or Monica Lewinsky's Altoid Mint presidential blowjob. Temperature play is kind of a thing. So why temperature play, you ask? Well, by adding hot or cold, it stimulates neuroreceptors under the skin, heightening sexual experiences. Temperature play is something that's been used in the BDSM world forever. So let's bring it into our bedrooms together, guys. There's many different vehicles you can use to incorporate temperature play. Some really easy ones like ice, water, food, glass dildos, or even wax. So let's get into some ways to play if you really want to turn up the heat. Start by tracing your partner's body or erogenous zones with a piece of ice. If this tip isn't enough, subscribe to Patreon for the whole thing.
And it's interesting because I had read something else yesterday about that there's, I don't know if the divorce rate is changed, but the success, no, it must have, because the success of marriages is increasing. And they say it's because we are in an era of casual sex relationships. Fuckboys is such a shitty term. I don't like it, but like essentially that we are taking our time, that there's not this grand rush. We're not making that leap based on the lust, endorphins and chemicals to get married. We're taking our time, that those wear off, and they kind of, people are able to sit back without that pressure of marriage and say, now that it's gone away, do I have a real lasting attachment? Am I really aligned with this person to choose them for life? And I think once people are getting to the point of marriage, it's not, marriage used to be like the beginning of your life together, whereas now I feel like it's kind of like the middle. Like you've already been through it. You've decided at this point, we're going to be able to do this together. And you're going into it with being able to make better decisions. And because really, it's not a time in life to make decisions when you're in lust. Like you just should not. Not about anything, really. But I
It's
thought it was
true.
interesting, and I think it's a good thing that people are now able to kind of ride that wave and go through these phases of life and then make more permanent decisions once it's worn off.
It makes such logical sense when you think about it that way, right? And in contrast, it's almost a little unnerving to think about like olden days
Right.
when, you'd fresh out of college, the next thing to do was get engaged and get a pick a fence and walk down the aisle and yada yada. And then
Yeah.
no wonder that falls to shit when you're 27 because
Yeah.
you're not the same person. And I mean, your frontal cortex hasn't even developed fully till you're 25, let alone making these lifelong decisions, birthing out children when you're 18. Like it changes a lot of stuff. And although the structure of marriage was so different and, the 50s kind of vibe, a lot of people felt stuck once they realized all that shit wore off.
Mhm.
Or there was that change that would happen once they got married. He changed or she changed and whatever. And it's like, all of that fluffy stuff can also get lost in wedding planning. Listen,
Mhm.
wedding and marriage are very different situations,
Right.
right? And so you're right. Now the fact that people sow their oats a little bit more, they practice dating, they experiment. Having four shitty dates is a lot more learning than having four great ones with one person. Now you think they're the one. Like you
Right.
learn so much more. And so you're better able to get navigate or make those decisions for the long term. People are having children later in life. They're getting married
Mhm.
later in life. Some people are choosing not to marry and just to common law or cohabitate. Or I know married people don't live in the same house, and it's because it keeps the lustiness alive,
Yeah.
but also the core root of those values and stuff they are building together. And personally, I think it's a brilliant idea. It's not for everyone, but it's
Mhm.
genius because you still get date night. Like, are you
Yeah.
picking me up at 8 o'clock? And like, whose house are we sleeping over at this weekend? And like,
Mhm.
all the fun parts of dating. And yet, you can both pay the mortgages. You can invest in all kinds of things that grow your family and become grandparents one day and travel the world together and all that shit. But keeping your own identity and your own space, and with modern women, your own money, your own finances, your own jobs and businesses, and all these things, it's just so different from the lifestyles of the 50s and 60s and so on that it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect
Yeah.
sense why, if you choose to get married, you're doing it better nowadays because you've experienced so much. You're more self aware. You probably learned some things by watching, TikTok and podcasts and all this shit about what these things mean, that now you have tools that you didn't have. They don't teach this shit in school.
Yeah.
They just leave you hanging. They don't teach you to budget. They don't teach you to file your taxes or how to
Yeah.
navigate a marriage. So, like, it makes sense that getting that experience, even if it's body count, or maybe it's just love count and lust count and all that kind of shit, that you're like, okay, now I'm really certain that this
Yeah.
is the person for me. And that certainty will make you work harder at it. At the same time, it shouldn't be hard. It should just be work. You know what I mean? And yes, marriages take work. Long-term relationships take work. It shouldn't always be hard. It shouldn't always be struggle or like fighting to stay together. It should be that I found my person. And so this we can build on, we can grow off
Yeah.
of, which is technically what people want to do when they're 21. We're just not
Right.
equipped to do when we're
Mhm.
21. And vice versa, like same kind of applies to seeing a provider, a sex worker, because you're again better to navigate. Don't fall in love with your first fucking attendant that you ever see.
Mhm.
See some. Find a few. There's nice ones everywhere. There's ones that'll stare in your eyes and say fluffy things everywhere. They'll cuddle. They'll message you on your day off and wish you a happy birthday. But know the difference between
Mhm.
who are the ones to invest in and which ones aren't. I think it's important for a customer to know that.
Yeah. And I think I think as stigma is decreasing for clients to see sex workers, this is also helping the situation that
Mhm.
they can have their sexual needs satisfied. They can have connection and real, conversations with people instead of marrying the first woman that puts out, right? They can still
Right.
have that element without having to get hitched to keep it. And I think that
Right.
just sets them up for better success in the future. So sex workers
Sure.
are helping people all over the world here.
Listen, it's a therapeutic. It constantly is. It's a real thing. But like it's a little bit of practice. It's
Yeah.
it's practice and trial and error with intimate scenarios of all different kinds, right? Because I mean, every session is different, let alone every different, girl that you see and blah, blah, blah. It can teach him kind of a few rules of the road so that by the time he gets out there, or dating after a divorce can be really scary for people, right? Especially if it was a long-term marriage. My wife and I were married for 35 years. I've been on a first date since 1972.
Mhm.
Like, that is a really scary thing. They've never even heard what a fuckboy is. They don't know about Tinder. Like that is a brand new thing that could be
Yeah.
a sea of vultures if you're not prepared. And seeing sex workers, especially a little bit younger than you can learn some things so that by the time you're ready to date, or while you're going through that messy divorce, or while you're in the midst of separation, like, we can actually help you navigate those things,
Mhm.
keep those needs fulfilled, and a little bit of science will help you from getting too caught up in all the fun.
The science is
As
interesting
fun as
though,
it is.
and I mean, it's a discussion we could go on and on about. I think the topic is so vast, but it's so interesting, and like
Yeah.
how we as humans were designed, whatever you believe in, our bodies are a very interesting place, and they're set up to let us experience such wild emotions and sensations. It's like a privilege, but it's also a little scary too. So it's just having that awareness.
Definitely. And I think it's like a lot of things when you become, I want to use like the fancifulness of enlightened, but just awareness to know so that you can then make those decisions is just so much better. I mean, what's the point of life if we're not learning, right? And so you may be in a really shitty dater when you were in college, but after a bit of experience, some shitty dates, some trial and error, some shorter term relationships, a couple long ones that don't work or whatever, a few sex workers in the mix, you've got a lot more tools in your tool belt,
Hmm.
and you've got a lot more armor that you can use to protect yourself from the bad and
Yeah.
navigate the good a lot easier. And the idea should be that you're questing for happiness, which
Mhm.
is found within, and then you get to share on the outside, right? And so if
Yeah.
you're more comfortable navigating intensity, especially with intimacy and emotional intensity, your emotional intelligence will then carry you through so that you can make at least smarter decisions. You'll still have some heartaches, you'll still learn some hard lessons, but it's not going to crumble you necessarily, or
Mhm.
it's not going to throw you off kilter, or hopefully you don't end up the guy who's obsessed. Like, it
Right.
can literally help you make such smarter decisions that lead you to joy. And maybe that joyfulness is being a single guy for 10 years that sees sex workers on the
Yeah.
regular. I work a lot, I don't have time for love, blah, blah, blah. But by
Yeah.
the time you are ready and you meet someone special, you'll be like, hey, I also got some physical skills. I know how to
Yeah.
make a woman come. I know where my prostate is. I know where all these things are. And then it's all because the parlor taught me. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of physical knowledge and self awareness about yourself that you literally become more enlightened in who you are as a man, as yourself. And so
Yeah.
you can then go navigate all of those things easier, which means you can also ride the ride a lot like freer because you're not going to be worried about like, am I going to fall off the deep end? You're like,
Right.
I'm gonna take this roller coaster while it goes. And then when it's done, you get off the roller coaster and you're okay. You don't need to
Yeah.
cry. We're okay. And
Yeah.
but like navigate that better so that your couple time, your single time, your all those times are just the best they can be. To me, I think sex workers come in clutch so often.
Well said.
Like your dating support system here.
I love it.
That's so good. I love that you brought this topic to us. I hope you do a tip or two on it eventually. We might even do more
I know.
episodes as we dive deeper into it. I think it's got, like you said, a lot to it, a lot of potential, each and everything. I mean, we know everything down to kinks is all mental stuff, right? And it's all core memories and embedded in your brain somewhere. So there will be much more to come on the science of sex, the brain as the top sex organ, and more pleasure for everybody as far as I'm concerned.
I love it.
I love it. This has been a great one. Thanks, Rye.
You're welcome.
I love it. We'll see you on the next one, guys. Thanks for
Bye,
joining us.
guys.